All right, so we're going to talk about the B's today, which is bounding box and the B-side paradigm. What does that all have to do with anything? This is one of those technical jargon videos that you're going to have to just deal with and get through to kind of understand when you're maneuvering through Nuke and so forth how things work. Again, the next tutorial that we do, which we're going to get into rotoing, will be more of getting to know Nuke, but really this sort of uphill battle we have until we get to the top of the plateau is understanding the mechanics of inside of Nuke. And there's certain elements that if you don't understand them, you're going to sit there and go, why is this doing this? And you don't want to be in that situation. So let's go ahead and get started. So here's the footage I have that I took from the Sony from the Shot 1 Sony A6300 Face Exposure MPEG-4. And again, we got a couple clips here you can see. And I want to talk about just bringing in other files and so forth. You can see the resolution of this image for what it is, 1920 by 1080. Okay, so that's HD 1080. All right. So kind of keep aware of that, and keep also aware that if I kind of scrub my cursor around, you could see this XY value is telling me the value here. You can see at the bottom it's like 0 and 0 is this last pixel here. If I come all the way in with my middle mouse scroll wheel, you can see I'm on pixel 0 to 0, and from that 0 to 0 point, what you could call the origin of the pixels, it goes up, and then in the Y, it goes this direction. So Y is up, and then X is across. And then that's why we get a 1920 by 1080 pixels. Now, we want to talk a little bit about understanding of bounding box and so forth. If I go ahead and create a constant, I'm going to go ahead and hit Tab over here and type in constant. Constant is basically just a solid color. So if I go ahead and choose a color such as, I'll come to click to the color wheel here, and maybe I'll choose a green color or whatever. So that would be a value of 0, 1, and 0. So you can see here. If you look at the constant, it says what format or what's the resolution of this image. By default, it's always going to go to the root format. Now, what is the root format? Well, by default, it's always set to Super 35, so and that's what our usual setting is in if I hit S for settings. So if I hit S for settings, you can see our full-size format is always set to this format. Okay, 2K Super 35, 2048 by 1556, one of the most common formats used in film. So I'm going to go ahead and put this to, just for the heck of it, HD 1080, okay, because eventually we're probably going to want to output 1080. So I'm going to usually set this. Commonly in Nuke, you will always hit S for settings and come in here and set this to whatever format you eventually want to finish on. It might not necessarily be the format of your original footage, so just be aware of that. Like for instance, the Sam Jackson Capital One commercials I worked on, we're using Alexa 4:3 aspect ratio, which is like pretty much a perfect square almost. But ultimately we mastered on 16:9, which was around, I believe it was around 2K DCP resolution eventually. So with that said, it's something to be aware of. But if I take this constant and I put its format to something insanely crazy big, like let's try, I don't know, 4K DCP, which is 4096 by 2160. That is now the resolution of this constant. If I put my viewer to it, you will immediately see the resolution, which is 4096 by 2160, okay? And that is basically what it is. Now, as we introduce the merge node, we're going to start merging things on top of things. So I'm going to go ahead and hit M for merge. And by default, the merge is set to over. So I usually use this little catchphrase, B for background, A for a top. So whatever I want in the background, I'm going to put as a constant, and whatever I want for what's kind of slapped on top of it, which will be the A. So I'm going to go ahead and put my viewer to the merge node here, and immediately we start to see something a little odd here. So first off, we can see the colors seem to be off. This image is being sort of mixed in or some forth into this image. One of the reasons why that could be is if we go back to our shot here and take a look at the read node. You can see that if I put my viewer to it, put my viewer here and hit A for alpha, you'll see there is no alpha information here, which can play games when mixing merges or mixing two different objects. So what if I want to give this just an alpha of, opaque? Well, you can come over here in the read node and you can actually come on here and say auto alpha. Okay, now that immediately will give you a nice alpha image if there is none. Usually a JPEG is information in the red, green, and blue, right? So I'm going to go ahead and come back to my merge node now, and now you can see we have a different story. Now what is going on here? Well, this is called the B-side paradigm. The B-side calls the shots. And what that means is it doesn't matter what my S for settings is set for here. Okay, so if it's 1920 by 1080, it's not going to conform to this image type if the actual resolution on the B side is different. So this calls the shots, okay? So if I were to switch this out, say if I come over here and switch this over here to, you know, B for background, A for top, we can see that now that because the green color, which has no alpha, we're getting that same issue once again, right? And if I go to my constant, you can see I'm only outputting channels red, green, and blue. If I were to output RGBA, okay, and again, I don't have any color for A, right? Or there's no alpha information, but if I ramp this up to 1, I now have alpha information in this constant. So it's important when you create things, you got to look at what you're outputting. You can see here RGBA. So I'm going to put my merge node back, and now you can see that, you know, the actual B side here has called the shots. You can still see this bounding box of information that is basically what we have available to us in this constant, but ultimately the resolution you can see has been conformed to whatever the B side is. So again, the B side calls the shots. That's something to be aware when you kind of do this. So I'll put this back to B and A like that. And you can see what begins to happen when the B side calls the shots. We're getting a continuation of a pixel as it kind of extends through here. Okay, so it just keeps going and going and going and going. And then up here, the pixel continues on up here, just keeps going. So what if we wanted to not have this repeating pixel? Well, we can go ahead and add a crop node. So I'll just type in tab and get crop node. And I'll go ahead and stick it in there like that, and that's going to purposely crop this so the pixels don't get extended. Now if I want to physically move this around, I could do so by hitting transform. And the transform will allow me to move this around in the space. So you can see it right here. So I think I got to be careful here because I have multiple objects open. So I'm going to go ahead and hit undo a couple times, which is Control Z. And I'm going to go ahead and put my properties bin to 1. I've mentioned many times how you should have your properties bin just set to 1. And I just want to make sure the transform node is selected. So now I'm not moving my crop around, I'm actually just moving the transform around. Again, I could use these arrows to rotate, and then I can go ahead and scale them out. If I wanted to animate this, I could by coming into the translate X and Y, right-clicking on a little squiggly line here and hit set key. You can see a little keyframe there. It's in the dope sheet. It's also in the curve editor. And you can see it's a little blue tick mark on here. I'll go to frame 50, move it like that. And then you can see that puts an auto key down. So you can see we have 2 blue keys in here. I can come in here and move the keys by grabbing them in my dope sheet, hitting my middle mouse scroll wheel to kind of move the viewer back and forth, hitting my left mouse down and move the keyframes around. The interpolation of the keys is over here in the curve editor, very similar to Maya. This tells me the interpolation. So you can see if I go ahead and play back the animation, it's very robotic. It's just going to come to a stop. I have to wait for it to cache, as you can see here. So it just immediately stops abruptly, right? Well, the interpolation of the animation on these keys can be found out. So I can go ahead and take the 2 keys. I can hit F to frame, use my middle mouse scroll wheel to kind of scrub back. I can grab a couple frames, hit F to frame them if I want to. And then I can go ahead and take these keys. I can lasso grab these keys, right click, and say interpolation and say horizontal. And this gives me a flat deceleration, so you can see now what's going to happen. It's going to come to a nice slow stop. You can do the same for over here. Grab these 2 keys, the X and the Y positions, and you can go ahead and say horizontal. If you want to go back to linear, you can go ahead and right and click these and say interpolation linear. And there's a whole bunch of goodies you can do in here as well. You can also break these tangents if you want. And then you can come in here, and you can come in here and grab them like this by clicking and holding. And if you hold down Control, you can pull down the actual tangent itself. You can see. So a lot of things you can kind of play with in here. You can animate anything, like I said before. So I can actually come over here, and I could use my little hotkey here to go to the last key. So I'm landing on the key right there. I will make a keyframe and rotate. I could either do it in this little bar here by right-clicking, hit set key, or coming to this squiggly line and saying set key. And then I'll move to the next key with my little hotkey button, where I place my translation keys, and then I will just rotate it like that. So now you can see I not only have translation animating, but rotation as well. There's scale as well. You can animate that if you wish. And you can also add some motion blur, so that as it moves along, you can see it's getting motion blur here. At any one time in your dope sheet, you can see we have keyframes for rotation, translation. Any one of these you can physically move around, so I can grab these two, move them around. If I have rotate, I can grab that independently. And then I can move these keys really close so the animation happens really quick, and you can see how we're starting to get motion blur. Motion blur will not be on if you don't have this set above 0. So if I put it back to 0, you can see there's no motion blur in there. But you can see as we start to animate this, let's say if I come over here and I put the animation outside the bounding box, you can see we start to get more information that's being saved up. This can actually kind of bog down your computer, but there is information of this out here, and that's why the bounding box increases. So when you see this little dashed line, that's basically what the bounding box is, and can change, and depending on if you want to crop all this, because sometimes you want to do that to save calculation information as you go down the pipe. As you build longer comps in Nuke, the more things will start to bog down, the more you want to optimize things. One of the things you can do to do that is you can do another crop right here. Bada boom. And this time we are cropping to the format, which is 1920 by 1080. So now you can see we've cropped it down here. If I want to change this to a different crop, I could change the values here. So I could take this and change it to the resolution of this constant right here, which is 4096 by 21. Let's say 4096 by, I believe it's 2160 if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 2160. And then you can see, again, we're starting from the 0 point here and moving out. This is the origin point. And now you can see the crop itself. We are not getting this data. So if I put my viewer to the merge node, you can see the crop. There's information on the outside here. If I crop it, you can see that if I do another transform here on the whole image, put another transform after this, as I pull it back, the data has been chomped away at. Now if I disable this crop, you can see the data is there. So be aware what the bounding box is and how you can kind of be aware of it by the little dashed lines and so forth. So that basically sums up what is the final redo here. The tool you will most likely use in the end will be Reformat. Reformat, for instance, I'll take the transform, move this object further over here, whatever, right? If I put the Reformat in here, Reformat is where I can choose to put this back to a format. So I'm going to go to the root format, which is set in my settings, or I can just define it as HD 1080 or whatever. And now if I put my viewer to the reformat node, it went ahead and took it and reformatted it. Now, it reformatted it by resizing it to the width, okay? If I say none, it basically zooms in, as you can see here, or you could say fit, and so forth. So there's a whole bunch of options here. There's fill, there's distort to kind of squeeze that information because the one is more widescreen than the other. There's height, and so forth. So be aware that, and you also have to the box itself here, and also you have scale, which is kind of cool, and then to format. So scale, you can actually scale it in and out, but most of the time if you were trying to get back to a format, you go ahead and just use a typical reformat, which by its defaults be set to whatever setting you have set for your thing here, which is 1920 by 1080. The resize type I usually put to say is none. So if I put my viewer to it, you can see nothing happened. But again, if I take a look at it, you do have the option here to choose preserve bounding box. And what that does is the resize, if we take a look at the merge before, is it sort of zooms in to a 1920 by 1080, but preserves all the information on the outside. So what that means is if I come in here with a transform node, I move it around, you can see once I click in the center, I can see there's data I can kind of reframe up, right? Which is kind of cool. So there's a lot you can do here, like I said, but just be aware of the many things. These are simple things I have to kind of go over. So that pretty much concludes everything that we need to do in regards to understanding bounding box and B-side paradigm. Again, it's a really simple concept, but it can confuse people when they start merging objects together and so forth. And then we're going to get into merges even more as we kind of move forward.